let's have a little look at one aspect of clean language interviewing. What I'm going to do, actually probably going to follow Sanjay's talk a little bit. I'm going to give you an example with a child. And I think that you're all bright enough. I don't need to spoon feed you the ideas that I've got. So I'll give you an example. And then from it, I want you to kind of go, what do we think is going on here in this example? What's the difference? Then I'm going to be asking you to join in. And so to do this, the most useful way that I know how to do this is if you'll all play a game a little bit, I'm going to say to you, what's something you'd really like to have happen? What's an outcome that you've got for the rest of 2022, either personal or professional? And I'm going to ask you to put it in the chat. And then when we come ready for it, we'll use some of the chat, and some of you who just love speaking and are confident speaking out loud, you'll just join in and talk to us. But I'll give you an example of non-clean interviewing. When I went to see my child at school, and the teacher said, you know, we just can't manage his behavior. He was 4 at the time. And I said, you know, well, what happened? And Grover, my child, said, I hit Isaac. And the teacher said, why would you hurt your friend? And he looked at her and he didn't speak. And she said, see, he won't even tell me why he does it. And I said, can I just check? Is that the way that you question him? Is that the way you interview him? She said, yes. And he never has an answer. I said, oh, okay. Let me just show you something, a little bit of a difference. I said, Grover, when you hit Isaac's, what kind of a hit was it? He said, I punched him in the face. I said, when you punched him in the face, what happened just before you punched him? He said, well, he pushed me. All right. And what happened just before he pushed you? He said, well, I pushed him. And I said, and just before you pushed him? He said, well, he called me a girly boy because my hair's long. I said, okay. And I said to the teacher, so one of the things that I'm doing is, and then you tell me, what's the difference between what I did and what she did? Just shout out in a non-British way.
You're going to let him drive the questioning. Ideally, he did it himself.
Yep, so I let him. So how come her question didn't let him drive the questioning?
He probably didn't know the answer.
How come? How come he knew the answer to my questions and not to hers? Her question was, why did you hurt your friend?
Well, he probably didn't want to hurt his friend.
Okay, so the first thing is there's an assumption that he wanted to hurt his friend. Yep, so potentially that wasn't there. Yep, somebody else?
Maybe it was a fear that he might get blamed.
Yep, so he might be in fear that he's going to get blamed. So how come, what's the difference between those questions and my questions?
Your questions were more about the event that happened, or the sequence of events that happened.
Yep, so I'm going for the event and the sequence. So what didn't my questions have in them?
Judgment.
So there's no A, there's no judgment. And B, there's nothing that he hasn't said happened. Yep. So all I asked him was, what happened before, and what happened next? That's all I asked him. So a clean language interview is, the questions are adjacent to what's been said. They don't come out of your head. You can't make them answer the question in your head. You have to build it up from what happened, and you have to ask a question that's very close. So we're not going to theorize about it. I'm now going to get you to give me some sentences, and then we're going to look at it. So some of you type in the chat, please, the answer to the question, what would you like to have happen? So in 2022, what would you like to have happen at work, in your life? If you want to tell us something secret, give us a metaphor. Say, I'd like to mow the lawn and make sure that the grass stays short. But we don't need to know what that means. So if you want to keep it secret, we can still work with metaphor. So just as some of those things are going to chat, can I just have somebody who's happy, who knows that they'll be okay? Just raise your hand if you know that you're okay to be a demo. It's easiest to be a demo because you're not the one who has to do any work. Okay, that's great. I've got Annalise there. I don't know if there were any more hands went up. So Sanjay will be a demo and Annalise will be a demo and Tom. Okay. So I'm going to we can use some of the ones in the chat in a moment, but I'll just go Annalise. So Annalise, what would you like to have happen?
I would like to pass my Microsoft Power BI Data Analyst Associate exam.
Okay, just say that once more. For some reason, the connection is not very clear.
Sorry, I would like to pass the Microsoft Power BI Data Analyst Associate exam.
Okay. So I'd like to pass the Microsoft, and I don't need to know exactly the details there because she knows what they are, analyst exam. So if I'm coaching or having a work conversation with Annalise, and these are my data points. So if I take a little bit like the conversation we had with my child, I might say, what kind of pass, Annalise, if you want to pass that exam, what kind of pass would you like?
To be honest, I don't think there's
Not a grade.
yeah, there's not a grade. It's just a pass or fail, basically. So
Yeah. And what needs to happen before you pass that Microsoft exam?
a little bit more studying. Book the exam.
So a little bit more studying. And when you pass that Microsoft Analyst exam, then what happens?
It'll take a weight off my shoulders, give me a sense of achievement.
I'm just going to pause you for a minute and just talk to the crowd about you. So a weight off my shoulders and a sense of achievement. So let's just have a little think about what we've got here so far. So she needs to do a little bit more studying. She'd like to pass the Microsoft something analyst exam, and that will give her a weight off her shoulders and a sense of achievement. So just a little bit, what am I up to at the moment? What am I doing?
You're trying to understand her why?
Yep, I'm trying to understand her why. What question did I ask to try and understand that?
The after, then what?
So what will that give you? The after question.
Yeah.
So it's quite useful for me to find out consequences and also what it does is it allows us to find out a bit more about the now, which is that right now there's weight on her shoulders. So I'm not just listening to the answer, but I'm reorganizing it into this kind of the sequence of it. Yep. So what we're also doing is coding. So in clean language interviewing, there's adjacency. So adjacency means how close am I to the words that have been used? So let's just think for a minute, if I was being non-adjacent, if I was going to take her attention away from her own thoughts and onto some others, what might I do to be, what could be a non-adjacent question? Or in our language, a dirty question.
Why do you want to do that Microsoft exam?
Now, why is an interesting one, isn't it? It isn't a clean question, even though it doesn't seem to have a lot of content. So what happens with a why question? How come we don't include those? Anyone got any ideas?
Overloaded in assumptions.
It's accusational. It kind of gets a defense mechanism up.
How come?
Because
What's the different inputs?
Confrontation.
Lots of reasoning.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. It's personal. Yeah. So one of the simplest things is the why somehow brings more attention to me and not just to the event. So there are a lot of people who do use a why question well, but we just kind of avoid them. You can build up stuff closer to it, more adjacent to the work that there is there. What's another non-adjacent question we could ask her?
How? Maybe a how question, like how are you going to achieve it?
So the how is probably not too bad. And even the achieve, I might let you get away with, because she sent that there's a sense of achievement. So I'm going to say, how are you going to achieve that? Is probably, in terms of distance, is probably quite close to what she said. If you said, that's going to be quite a burden on your time, that'd be just nonsense. Let's even turn that in a question. Are you worried that you won't make it? It's filthy. What does it introduce?
Like a yes, no answer.
Yep, we do use yes, no answers, but yeah, so, you know, are you worried that you won't achieve it, or will you need help to achieve it?
Introduce doubt.
Yeah. It just
Dropping of belief, yeah.
Yeah, introduces the stuff you've made up about beliefs. It introduces the notion that she won't do it. It just introduces stuff that's extraneous to the whole thing. So when you've heard this, suppose that this is your colleague, and you want to ask her a useful question. She's given us this as something that she really wants to have happen. What's a cleanish question that you could ask? I've given you some really simple, there's sort of, with what David Grove, when he developed clean language, he said you can ask about attributes. So what kind of? Is there anything else about? Location. I'll show you how to use these in a minute. We'll use the weight on her shoulders, because that's a nice, simple thing to remember. And it's a metaphor. So if it wasn't a metaphor, you can get one. What happens next? What happens before? So those are cleanish questions. Let's have a little look at how I might use them. So that'll be a weight off my shoulders. And right now, what kind of weight is that weight, Annalise?
It's probably something that's playing on my mind because I've set myself a goal on a personal level, and I want to just make sure that I achieve that goal.
Did she say, I didn't quite hear, did she say weighing on my mind? Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, she did, yeah.
Did I?
When it's weighing on your mind, and then it'll be a weight off your shoulders and a sense of achievement, whereabouts will that sense of achievement be? You think about that sense of achievement, and you can all think about your own senses of achievement. But Annalise, when you have a sense of achievement, whereabouts is your sense of achievement?
It's in your head.
In your head?
Yeah.
I'm just going to remove the spotlight so that you can see her when she speaks. So yours is in your head. Let me just pause for a minute. For the rest of you, when you have a sense of achievement, where's your sense of achievement? Who's different to that? Was that a heart?
Yeah.
Who's got it in their heart? Let's just have a look at you. I've got to read your names.
Manoj.
Okay, so yours is in your heart. Whereabouts in your heart?
It's that feeling which you get of achieving something which you had planned for, and you made it successful. So
you made it successful. Yeah, when the Manoj, it's a feeling in the heart. And Tom, you're like a sunflower. Yeah, what kind of sunflower?
I'm like a sunflower that's turning towards the sun. So I've got big petals, big yellow petals, and I'm turning towards the sun, and it's bright.
So I've got big petals. He's turning towards the sun, and he's bright. So that sunflower is bright. So then these are the kinds of questions that we can ask. So whereabouts is the sun? We could find, because think about that. I'm turning towards the sun. From where to where? So we might say, whereabouts is the sun? Or I'm bright. Is there anything else when I'm bright like that? I wouldn't obviously ask a metaphor question because he's clearly a metaphor. He's not really a sunflower. What happens just before he turns, or when he turns towards the sun? Then what happens? So this is what you could do if you had Tom. Let's get one more difference to a sense of achievements, just so we can compare and contrast with Annalise's, which is in her head. Is that Maru? It's in my heart and my solar plexus. So, when it's in your solar plexus, it's a bit like what?
Like an energy ball that is at the same time as small as my two wrists joined together, and as big as the sun at the same time.
So an energy ball, as small as my two wrists joined together and as big as the sun.
Yes.
Then, when you've got energy ball, the questions slip in. Which of these questions could we ask about an energy ball? What could we ask to find out more about the client's model?
Is there anything else about this energy ball?
Yep, so you could ask about the attribute. Is there anything else? Yep, what's another question we could ask?
Where is the energy ball?
Yep, where is it? Well, we know, so it's in his, I think, in the heart and solar plexus. But whereabouts? So when it's an energy ball, whereabouts in the heart is that energy ball?
Center of the heart.
Say that again?
Center of the heart.
And so, of course, each of us, when we hear anything, we have to make sense of it. So you hear the word energy ball and you'll have made up stuff in your head. And as Sanjay was saying, you'll have made up stuff that's related to your background, your experience, your internal architecture, but it's just not likely to be the same as theirs. And so a clean question keeps their stuff. You can make up, you can't not make up nonsense, we do. But as you make it up, the question that comes out of your mouth, if you want fresh information from them, then you need to ask a cleanish question that's adjacent to theirs. Now, before, we're going to do some more practice, but before I go any further, why would Agile people be interested in adjacency? Like, how come my work keeps getting picked up by the Agile world and used?
Is it because, does it help people to make sure that things that they're building is you drill right down to understand the root cause of why somebody says they want something?
Yeah. So you can, to use the metaphor, you can drill down to root causes. Yeah. Why else? Why else might be useful for you to be adjacent as opposed to them,
It's giving accountability for the person to come up with the relevant issue which needs to be dealt with.
Yeah, it's a huge part of it. You know, anyone who knows the background to my work, I started with teenagers before somebody said, could you do this in IT? And the big part of clean questions is that I am not the person to create the change. I'm the person to ask questions, but I assume that once you have a model, you are accountable for creating changes in your life and your products, or to be really clear what you want from somebody else. So yeah, accountability, it assumes accountability to the other. Yep. Any other reasons why Agile people would be interested in Is
this not a coaching technique really?
Sorry, say that once more.
Is it not more of a coaching technique, the sort of questions you should be asking while coaching?
So it is often used in coaching, but it's also often used in product, I don't know what you call it in your world, but it's used in elicitation of customer needs. It's a huge thing. So you can use it to change people, or you can use it to simply find out data.
So requirements gathering, yeah?
Yeah. So you can use it for coaching. It's great for agile coaching, but it's eliciting data. Okay. You ready to? I want you to have another little go. Annalise, if we just come back to you, you know your sense of achievement in your head?
Yeah.
Yeah. Heard some other people's sense of achievement. Your sense of achievement is a bit like what?
I'm not sure.
Okay, when did you see that look that they gave you? If you get that, don't keep on with your question. Ask something better, because that question doesn't land. And that's a really important facet of clean interviewing. Your allegiance is to getting good quality information, not to the model. So if clean questions aren't getting you what you want, do something different. Give them an example. Go somewhere else. Yeah, don't just keep asking a question because it's something you're practicing. Just go somewhere else and ask them something different. I'm going to let you go for a minute, Annalise. I'm going to look at, so Tom, I'm going to ask you now. So if Annalise's outcome is to do a little bit more studying, of course, we could have asked her what needs to happen for her to do a little bit more studying. And she wants a weight off her shoulders and a sense of achievement. Tom, what did you want to have happen?
Oh, I think by the end of 2022, I'd like to get my teams back to a high-performing state.
Okay, just so get my teams back to a high-performing state.
Yeah.
Okay, don't tell us anything else, because I just want to look. The first thing you do is you've got to observe. You've got to orientate yourself to that, to those words, in order to then decide what it is you're going to do about it. So get my teams back to a high-performing state. So what do we know? Before we ask them a single question, what do we know? What can we presume fairly logically from what he said?
They once were high-performing and are no longer?
Yep. So time-wise, they used to be a high-performing team or high-performing state. And for some reason, there's now, and then there's end of 2022.
He has an idea of what a high-performing state is.
Yep. So this is an inference. And only he knows what the evidence is for that. So another question we could add in is, what will you see and hear? So we could ask for evidence. What will you see and hear? These are all very, very adjacent. So if a high-performing state is an inference, the evidence is just next to it. We're not asking him for new information. We're not asking him, we're not telling him ideas. We're just going, let's take what he's just said and go, let's what's the evidence? Yep. What else can we infer about this?
He has a sense of ownership or over the teams.
There's some sort of, who's got the volition? It's to get my teams. Yeah, so there's a sense of ownership, or they're my teams, responsibility. We don't know what it is. We've got to be careful. Every word that we use, obviously we're not saying it out loud. Don't let him hear us do this thinking. But every word that we use, notice. If we said, oh, he's got responsibility, and we bring in that word, we've shaped it. If we say he's got ownership, we've shaped it. but there's something. Yeah, my teams means something to him. So we could say, is there anything else? When it's my teams, anything else about the my? We could ask him this. Okay, let's go and I'll ask him a few clean questions now, just demo. So Tom, when I want to get my teams back to a high performing state, what kind of state are they in now?
At the moment, they are getting to know each other. We've got two teams that have come together to form one. And they're getting to know each other.
And as they're getting to know each other, is there anything else about the getting to know each other that they're doing when two have become one?
I think they're talking. I'm hearing a lot more talking. I'm seeing a lot of chatter in Slack. I'm seeing a lot of interactions.
And when I want to get my teams back to a high performing state, what kinds of teams are my teams?
My teams are two teams, but those two teams have become one.
And when it's back to a high performing state, what were those two teams like before?
They were really chatty and they were delivering things really, really quickly. And there's a lot of energy, a lot of high energy in that team.
When I hear two things, it's not a pattern yet, but there's talking and there's chatter now. They were chatty before. If I hear another chat related to something, I'm going to say this is going to be one of his evidences that a team is high performing. Do you know, at the moment, I'm just holding this as a hypothesis, but after a while, you can start to go, okay, this seems to be a pattern. So they delivered things quickly, they were chatty. Oh, did anyone remember I started talking? What were the other criteria at the beginning? And what did they used to do? I don't remember, just let it go. You can't remember everything. And I want to get my teams back to a high performing state. What kind of get could that get be?
Could be an enabling get.
Yep. So it could be enabling. What else could it be? Dr. Tom, don't tell us yours yet.
The leadership get.
Yep, it could be a leadership. I could be leading them. I could be enabling them. What else? What other kind of get could it be?
Coaching them.
Yep, I could coach them. I could lead them by the nose. I could beat them.
Yeah, you could force. It could be forceful.
Yep, it could be forceful. So let's find out from Tom. And this is the point. It's like who owns at this stage. And I tell you what, as a precocious child and very, cleverest girl in my year at school, but bear in mind I went to a fairly rough comprehensive, coming up into this and going all my life showing off, being clever, working stuff out was all I ever wanted to do. And then when I came across clean, it absolutely teaches you to do nothing. All you have to do is to listen. It's like Lego. You go, oh, I'll ask 2 questions about that. Oh, okay, I've got some information. Now I'm going, there is nothing clever about it. The cleverness is in remembering what is it that you're having this conversation for? Am I going for the best bit for this? So just bear in mind that all these assumptions that we make, especially those of you who are good problem solvers, clean interviewing is a bugger because it stops you doing the stuff that you like to be good at. So if, like me, you like being clever, you like working stuff out faster than the other person, this will hurt you. It will twist you into a nasty shape where you have to shut your mouth and let them speak. So Tom, when you want to get your teams back to a high performing state, what kind of get?
I want to support and coach them.
And we'll ask one more. What kind of thing does the rest of you, what kind of thing would you like to know from him?
I'd be curious if they're willing to be supported and coached.
Ooh. So Mohammed's bringing in the idea of what do the teams want? Now, how adjacently could you do that? I've got an idea. I've just thought of one. So we could ask, and when you'd like to get your teams back to a high performing state, what would your teams like to have happen? See, then that way I haven't narrowed. A lot of clean interviewing is about don't narrow the data that can come back to you. So what would your teams like to have happen? Now you can say they, they hate me, they want to be left alone, or you might not know. So what would your teams like to have happen, Tom?
I think the teams would like to be back at that high performing state.
What have you seen and heard that lets you know that they'd like to be back at that high performing state?
During retrospectives, they're talking about where they are now and where they would like to get to, and reminiscing of previous times.
And then, of course, this is just us clean interviewing, using adjacency to expand what he said. Now we could use any of our, sequence questions, such as what needs to happen when you want to get them back. What needs the sequence? What needs to happen? What's the first thing that could happen? What's the first thing that you're going to do? So then we can start to move it around. Okay, so I'm just going to pause again and say, how come we're not always adjacent? Why don't we just build everything up from the ground? What do we do instead?
Preoccupied with their own thoughts.
Yep, we'd like to bring in our own thoughts. What else?
We guess, use intuition.
We guess. Yep.
We are not going too far out of the subject.
So I'm just checking if I understand what you mean by not being too far out of the subject.
Means like rather than going again from something new, you are still continuing with the continuation of whatever the person is actually trying to achieve as his goal.
Yeah. So in this work, you stay quite close to what they've said, and you tend not to move around until you've got enough. You kind of go, yep, I've got this bit. When we guess, how come we guess things? Why do we do that? She said, asking a why question. Where do our guesses come from?
Probably from
our experience and intuition.
Yeah, intuition. that old chestnut. What is intuition? So, I mean, if I say to you right now, she was really, really stuck. Let's just take for a minute. So stuck, when somebody's stuck, they could be stuck like what?
Rock.
Like a rock. Yep.
Glue.
So again?
Glue.
Glue. Okay, let's just take those, rock and glue. So even for you to just have heard those words, rock and glue, you have to make up what kind of rock and what kind of glue. The mind abhors a vacuum. And so again, clean language, clean interviewing, and I do think there are some elements of similarity with this in Agile, is you have to stay in a state of not knowing. You have to try a little bit and then iteratively do it until you get somewhere. So you might have a vague idea, but you can't force things to go from one place to another. You have to kind of go, I want to know this kind of information, but then you pay close attention to the data, you get feedback, and you make another assumption. So let's just check, what did you make up about that glue first?
I was I was in my mind, I was seeing like.
Oh, no, don't you tell us it's your glue. Tell us. You've got your glue's real glue. I want to know what they've all made up about you.
Oh, right, sorry.
It's okay. What kind of glue did you make up the rest of you? And where was it?
I was thinking of super glue, because when you said the word stuck, you said it in such a way that she was really stuck. So I was like super glue.
Okay, so that intonation I used made you go for super glue. Who imagined that Tim meant a different kind of glue?
White sticky glue that you used to use at school that paint on with a paintbrush and it used to get everywhere.
Yes, that's a light sticky glue. Yeah. Tom's got a UHU glue and a stick. Yeah. I know for me, I immediately went to my feet. So if I was stuck in glue, it's like for me, the glue would be there. But obviously we can ask him. Luckily, we can say, Tim, what kind of glue was that glue? Just ask for the attribute.
Yeah, so it was super glue sticking the feet, as you said, Kevin. So a combination of the two.
Yeah, Mohammed, you and I together, our assumptions went well. Yeah, but you don't need to be clever, obviously. We can just ask him. He's right there. And when it was a rock, what kind of rock was it? Just before you tell us, what kind of rock did you, if you're stuck like a rock, what kind of rock did you all make up?
A big boulder.
Yeah, what was the stuckness?
It was just on the floor, not immovable.
Okay, so Tim made up a big immovable boulder on the floor. Who made up something different?
I had Stonehenge, one of the boulders that's in the ground.
Okay.
I had primitive humans or Neanderthalians not gluing stones to a stick, but gluing them using glue, uhu glue. They discovered uhu 10,000 years before us. Smart guys.
You've got to combine those two metaphors. Annalise, she's got the boulder stuck between two rock faces. So right now we're just playing, and obviously we can find out, Manoj, what kind of rock was that rock?
Very heavy and square shape.
Okay, so now you know that's what makes it stuck. It's the combination of the heaviness and the squareness. Just before we close, in clean interviewing, there is no need to be metaphorical. You can ask for location, attribute, sequence. It's perfectly reasonable. Lots of the time when I was first developing this, it was, I was doing it with the police. So I was teaching the police to interview vulnerable witnesses after the Damilola Taylor case. So you don't always have a metaphor, but when I do business interviewing, when I'm interviewing before a project, I often ask for a metaphor. What's the use of metaphors from your point of view?
I find metaphors really useful when I'm working with teams, because people have got very different metaphors, and sometimes those metaphors come into conflict with one another without people knowing.
Yeah,
I found Clean's quite useful for bringing those differences and nuances to the surface.
So you can use metaphors to compare and contrast. Yeah, anyone else? Why might you, particularly you guys work in the data field, how come metaphors can be useful? Where are they useful?
A hypothesis. Yeah,
in a hypothesis.
I think they are one of the most efficient compression formats humanity has ever invented. They encompass whole books in one metaphor.
So if you take Annalise's boulder stuck between two rock faces, that is a very different kind of stuck to a heavy square-shaped boulder. And how you would go about unsticking those are quite different. So yeah, they can carry a lot of information. When I was my very first piece of business work, which was in an IT company, when I said I wanted the project to be like whitewater rafting, where, it's a bit hectic, we all fall in, we all get back in the boat, it's really exciting, we hit the side. And the person I was talking to was like this, like, oh, get her away from me. And I said, if this project was just the way you'd like it to be, he said it would be like perfect blueprints, carefully formulated. And that each blueprint corresponded in size and scale to I was like, oh my goodness, get me away from him. But actually we used the metaphors to build a joint metaphor for how we were going to get along together. And the metaphors, you know, as Manu's saying, they allowed me to see what was to feel what was important to him, and he could get what was important to me and how we were going to actually behave together. Okay, so I'm going to stop talking now, because that's a little whistle stop introduction to adjacency, to a few clean questions, and to why, as I said, playing with Sanjay stuff, sometimes you just don't use any words of your own at all. Just keep your mouth shut, use their words and a few clean questions, and they can take you an awful long way. So I shall hand back to you.
Thank you very much indeed, Caitlin. That was amazing. I think it's something that is going to take a lot of practice. I think it's, I suppose it's something that you've got to be pretty brave as well. It's something that's probably quite hard.
Right.
You've got to do it in the real world, right?
Don't practice with your customers. Practice with teammates, practice with friends. Don't practice on your kids. They will not like it. And anyway, they'll do it back to you. They say things like, I'll come in, I'll say, oh, sorry, I just lost my rag. And they'll say, and just before you lost your rag, what happened? So yeah, don't teach your kids this.
Have you got time for any final questions, Caitlin?
Yeah.
Storming them up. Has anybody else got any questions?
I put in an event in case anyone is interested. I put in an event that's coming up, but you also don't need to go to training. I mean, I know it's not a great business model, but you can just take 2 questions a day and practice them. And then do it again, and then do it again, take 2 different ones, and then you'll just get good, because they'll force you to pay attention. But yeah, any questions?
I'm interested in knowing if you've ever used this against suspects, criminal suspects.
Yes.
And again, sorry, it's a wrong expression. Just with them. Yes. Yes. Does that unfold differently? Does that?
The only difference is if you want to cuff them to a crime that you've decided that they've done. What clean questions are really good at, because it's not just criminals, but also if you're interviewing somebody who is pretending to be somebody that they're not, then you look for congruence between their answers. And so clean interviewing really shines a light on their incongruence, and it doesn't let them hear what you want them to say, so they can't make up the answer to make you happy. Yeah, so it's really good for interviewing, and it's really good for for finding out what actually happened.
So maybe just to put you on the spot, if possible, could you give an example of that?
Yep. So, do you mean in interviewing or with
yeah, with criminal, with
criminals?
a criminal example.
So, if I've got somebody who says, yeah, so what happened? Well, they grabbed me by the throat and they pulled me to the ground. And they grabbed you by the throat. And whereabouts by the throat did they grab you? Oh, just here. Okay. So it's just here. And what happened just before they grabbed you? And what they have to do is, because the questions go in adjacently, they have to give me a logic sequence of events that goes to this, has to all fit together. And if we can then, we know perfectly well that they couldn't have come from this direction, that we can see that the tracks come this way, you can go, that model doesn't fit the evidence. And they have to be very, very bright to remember what actually happened and fit all of their made up stuff to the evidence. So it's about building up the logic sequence of events.
Thank you.
Yeah. So in that example, Caitlin, the objective of the clean question asking is to reach to understand the scenario and understand the lead up to an event. When you were asking us about what we want to have happen, and we started doing the analysis on questions we're going to ask, what was the outcome that you were looking for? Were you trying to coach and trying to see how you could get people to that outcome? Or was it just to understand what that thing looked like?
Just understand at the moment, just to understand what it looked like. If you wanted to coach them, you'd be looking, then you'd start pulling back to what are the conditions that will allow this to happen. So if Annalise wants to study a little bit more, We're saying how much more, a little bit, and what would need to happen just before a little bit more study. You'd be looking for the bits to go in there. Or if I was doing motivational interviewing, I might say, when there's a weight off your shoulders, then what happens? What does that give you? And that'll be like what? I might then really get her into the outcome. Yeah, so that would be where I'd have more of an agenda.
So you'd have to understand the problem. So if there was a problem that someone wanted to reach that goal, but was struggling to reach it, you'd frame the questions differently.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the difference between a clean interview is I want to find out what's the case now. And coaching is, I need to know what it's like now and what you want to happen. So it's future orientated. And if it's healing or therapy, it's what do you want in the future, and how did it come to be this way? So it's got a past and future orientation. But I wouldn't do therapy or coaching without a contract. I wouldn't just, assume that Annalise needs help just because she told me she wants to pass something, because that would be rude. Unless she said, can I have some coaching about this? I wouldn't flip into coaching. And I think that's really important to say this in a workplace. If you don't have a contract to coach, please don't use this stuff for coaching. Yeah, use it to find out information you're curious about, but that's it.
We've actually had a question from Michael. Michael asks, what do you do when you get nothing but no comment? Wait to continue later or continue at the time?
Well, it depends. What are you asking them for? Again, I cut my teeth with kids outside the school system. And when people say, oh, you couldn't do this in my workplace, I go, yeah, you try doing it out in the street with kids who are armed. It's fine. People can do it. It depends. Are you asking a good question for a good reason? So when I asked Annalise, that sense of achievement, whereabouts is, or it's like what? And she goes like that, just shut up and move on, do something different. So if there's no comment, either they don't know it, they don't want to tell you, they do know it and they don't want to tell you, or I don't know. Yeah, either they don't know or they do know and they don't want to tell you, or they do know, but they don't know how to express it yet. Or, there's all sorts of reasons. So I would always look at what's my intention for asking this question, and what's my contract with this person. And if, let's suppose I'm managing you and I know you've consistently been late for a meeting, and I say, so what happens just before you're late? And they say, there's no comment, I don't want to discuss it. And I might then say, okay, well, I don't want to discuss it. What I need you to do is I need you to go find out what happens, because this is what I would like to have happen. I'd like to see and hear this. So that's like a clean statement, but it all depends on what your contract is with this person. But yeah, just make sure you, like with Annalise, you haven't just asked a nonsense question that doesn't make sense to their system. Yeah, don't make up that they don't want to answer it just because maybe you didn't ask a very good question.
There's actually one coming from Tom. Very briefly, what is the difference between systemic modelling and symbolic modelling?
So symbolic modelling, David Grove invented a stuff called clean language. Penny Tompkins and James Lawley modelled him. They spent years following him and trying to work out what he was doing. And they made it into a model they call symbolic modelling. And it's brilliant. I worked alongside them, but because I wasn't a therapist or a coach, I was a youth worker. I went, how do the principles of how he works, what happens if you apply those principles to a group? So it's quite different in terms of, there's no trance induction. I'm not a therapist. I can do therapy now, but that's not what I do. So it's quite lighthearted. You don't ask more than 2 or 3 questions of anybody. You keep it upbeat, conversational, and you don't go too deep because you don't have a contract. Symbolic modeling, you can use it for lots of different reasons, but it might be more trancy. It might be more like a coaching technique. Just saying, John Farrell, how do you deal with an interviewee that asks you, the interviewer, a question? Just clarify it and answer. Generally, I like a little exchange of ideas. Generally. So I'm just checking time.
I think I saw a hand go up. Manu, did you have your hand
Yeah, but then Caitlin said she's checking time. That's why.
No, it's all right for me. I don't want to be overstaying my welcome.
All right, I just want to respect your time. I was wondering, the model you explained with the four facets of questions, the before and after. I have the impression that you also dive into what, this thing in the middle that the coach wants to have happen. In your example, you had the flip chart with the sequence before and after, but I have a feeling you also ask about what's going on inside, or if there are any intermediary events in there.
Yeah. So what happens before, then what happens? It's also like the little slivers of time just before something needs, and what needs to happen. You don't want to be pulling back too far. You might say, where did it come from? How did it start? Go right back. But generally with clean interviewing, if I start to use it in a bit coaching, I'm trying to find out, what do you have control over? But yeah, I'm trying to find out how it's like now, and then what happens just before, what happens next.
Well, you don't ask them questions about what's going on, how it's going to happen inside. You don't care about that.
Do you mean inside them?
No, inside the kind of black box that's between the before and after. They're gonna do something.
Yeah, so I might say, what needs to happen just before that? What's the next thing that will happen? Yep, I might need to get a full behavioral sequence. I go right. I can go right in.
Okay. All right. And my other one was.
Yeah, and I was going to say, I can source things. So when Tom says the guys are reminiscing, I can find out all about the reminiscing, or and when you want them to be a high performing team, what will happen just before they're a high performing team? How far away are they right now? There are lots of little questions I can ask to help build up my model.
Okay, got it. And what should we be careful about if using this with children?
With children?
Yeah, is there anything we should be careful about?
I mean, it's anyone who's got small children, it's brilliant. When they present you a drawing, and before you say, oh, it's a fire engine, just say, oh, what kind of a thing is this thing, and where did that come from? And it's brilliant for that. I mean, children, I know I've taught schools, they can use it with kindergarten kids, so little ones can answer it really easily. Don't teach them it, because they will have your life. And my children are horrors now. The only other thing is, don't go more than 2 or 3 questions ever. This is children and adults. It is not, one of the very first pieces of business work I did, it was a startup company, and I said, you'd like this company to be like what? He said, I'd like it to be safe. I said, what kind of safe? He said, well defended. I said, it's well defended. Is there anything else when it's well defended like that? He said, yeah, it's somewhere that we can hide behind. When you hide behind, what kind of hide is that hide? Well, when you want to protect yourself. What kind of an eye that wants to protect themselves? He said, well, it's like sandbags that I used to hide behind at boarding school when I was being bullied. And you go, do you know what? The first 2 questions were fine. Then I should have just shut my mouth and gone to somebody else. This is when I just didn't understand the rules of systemic modeling, which is 2 questions, 3 at the absolute most. Go to somebody else or go to a different area of what they've talked about. Yeah, you are not a walk around therapist. Just don't do that. Not unless you're a trained therapist and they're paying you in some way.
So you're saying these questions go deep very quickly. After 2 or 3 questions, you might be okay.
It's to do with the adjacency. They slip in. And so because they're fine and they slip in easily, you have to be responsible. Ask them responsibly.
Thank you.
Okay.